Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
And we thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. And we extend an invitation for people to become patrons.
Yes, we do.
We were just talking with our patrons on our exclusive podcast. We have a goal set. If you go to patreon.com/speakingout, you'll find that we have a goal of 250 patrons. Once we meet that goal, we're going to throw a shindig for our patrons.
This will be a party like none other. We are excited about it. We are excited to meet all of you. So chime in, join the other patrons, and let's do this.
And that's at any level. It begins at $5 a month. There's no commitment. You can come and go as you please. You can sign up for 1 month if you want.
Yep.
And $5 is the price of a coffee.
Starbucks coffee.
At $4 coffee. The pricey stuff.
Actually, some of their coffee is even more. I about passed out.
Yeah,
It's
it is.
Whoa.
It is.
Yeah.
But anyway, for $5 a month, we have different tiers, different rewards for each tier. We would love for you to become patrons and help support this podcast because we literally cannot do this without our patrons.
Right.
So, just our little plug for you guys. All right. We got a question emailed to me about something that I think is pretty important from a listener to the podcast. And we're going to talk about these people who bring abusers into the church or into wherever. It can be any organization, schools, wherever.
Daycares.
Sure.
I mean, I can think, any number of places.
Yeah. So the question is, the people that bring known convicted sex offenders into their organization, do those people really believe that these people are safe people, and would they send their own kids or grandkids to be in the care of these people? Mm-hmm. And I think it's pretty incredible because this person who said that in the email said, I'm not hearing anybody ask these questions.
Yeah. When I read that,
and I thought that's very true.
Yeah, we have not discussed this at all.
But nobody's asking it.
No, nobody has asked it.
And I think that's such an obvious question.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that people aren't asking it. I can't believe that we haven't had a podcast on this.
Right.
And in fact, I have a saying, and I kind of probably have to revise this saying a little bit, but I have a saying that church leaders who hide abusers within the confines of their churches, and they have these secret policies. You all know my stance on that. I think they're pathetic. I think they're dangerous. I think they're naive. These covenant agreements between church leaders and abusers that keep them hidden in the church. They keep them anonymous. Only the church leaders and the convicted serial child rapists are aware of these policies. And what they do is it's accountability. They're going to sign accountability partners. I call them babysitters. They're going to sign accountability partners, sign this covenant saying that they're not going to go into the children's wing, et cetera, et cetera. They're very dangerous policies because they don't inform the congregation that registered sex offenders are sitting in the pews. And for a whole host of reasons, it's just a bad idea. So the question is, do those church leaders really believe that these people are repentant? And so my saying was, church leaders who have these covenant agreements, they have the benefit of being in the know, and they're able to keep everybody else in the dark. So they have the power to keep everybody else in the dark. So I think I'm going to revise that a little bit because even though that's true, they have the benefit of being in the know. In other words, they're the only ones who know that this person is a registered serial sex offender. And then they have the power to keep everybody in the dark. It doesn't really matter that they're in the know. Because the short answer to these questions that we're going to ask is, yes, they would send their own kids, and sometimes they do send their own kids to be in the care of these convicted sex offenders.
And that seems absurd, Jimmy, but it's not.
No.
Because they truly, I think, believe when they see the alligator tears and they hear, I was converted in prison, or I am a changed person. Now I beg your forgiveness, and that's behind me. I no longer would do any of this, and I welcome people to sit with me in the auditorium. I promise I won't go in the kids section of the building, and on and on. I really believe that those people in charge, so to speak, those in the know, believe the abuser.
Yeah, I really do, because
I think they do.
I think it's a mistake to think that leaders who have these horrific policies, I think it's a mistake to think in their mind they're thinking, boy, we're going to keep this the best known secret from the congregation so that this abuser can have unhindered access to all these children within our church. And they'll most likely be abused. I don't think that's what's on their mind. And I know from experience, from talking to church leaders, when I ask them about their policies, and I'm like, what were you thinking when you developed this policy? Oh, well, we believe in grace. We believe in forgiveness. We believe that the churches should be a safe place for all. And I've come to really not like that saying for all. Those two words, for all, for me, it just feels gross, because I've heard it used so many times in the context of we're going to do what's quote unquote best for all, meaning we're going to keep this person's past in a tight sealed can, hidden from everybody else, and we're going to do our best to work with this covenant agreement to keep parents' kids safe in our church. And it's a recipe for disaster. Because what it does is it totally enables the abuser to get exactly what they came for.
I think we have to interject something here. An abuser is different from other sinful people. In that this sin is a premeditated, it's very well thought out. It is a horrific sin of transgression. It is a breaking of the law. Well, I was going to say, it's not just a sin; it's a crime. It is a crime, and which sets it apart from the person who strayed from his marriage and sinned and had an affair. It sets him apart from that person in that, there were a lot of things that went into the person that had the affair, but certainly not an intentional, or I would hope not, well thought out plan to destroy and hurt a child. And it makes a different, totally different scenario here. This person that's being protected has most of the time spent time in prison. We're talking about those who have been convicted, right? A known criminal abuser. They've spent time in prison, and now the church is welcoming them, but in a very secretive way, telling this person, we'll keep this quiet. We don't want to
But it's not the church welcoming them.
No,
it's the church leaders welcoming them. Because the church doesn't even know. No. The church is unaware.
No. And then comes that little caveat, does the church need to know? Does the body of Christ, that family of believers, need to know? Yes, they need to know. Why? Because an abuser is an abuser is an abuser. And we don't have data to prove otherwise. We have data to prove that the majority of abusers do what? They commit abuse again and again and again and again.
Well, we know that too because they got a conviction. It's not like this was they had...
Well, one time...
They had bad thoughts and, had a misstep. And, as Anna Salter gave the one example in her book, the guy who literally said, I slipped on a banana peel, and, next thing, I think his was a bar of soap. He slipped on a bar of soap and then found himself in this compromising position with this minor child.
I don't think so.
It's that absurd, and these guys, the abusers, that is, come up with these absurd, lame excuses for why they did what they did, and it was always an accident. It was always somebody else's fault. Right. It was always just a misjudgment. It was, and that's never the case.
Was it Anna Salter's book, or which book am I thinking of, where there was an interview, Jimmy, with a man that staked himself out while he was in prison? He could watch school children, and I can't remember the name of the book. And the long and the short of it is, at the end of this whole correspondence...
Yeah, I don't think he was staking them out. And I know what you're referencing. It was...
he said he...
I think it was Eyes of a Pedophile.
That's it.
Is the name of the book.
That is
I have it over here on my shelf.
Okay.
I'd have to dig through. I have a mountain of books over here on pedophilia, but
remembering where he said he would do it again and again.
At the end of the book.
At the end of the book,
he said, they were wrapping up their interview, and he looked at his watch and he said, the kids are getting out of school about now.
Right. And that's what was on his mind. That's all that was on his mind. So, and that just struck me hard, that it just doesn't end.
No, they never stopped thinking about kids in a sexual way, or thinking about kids generally.
Right.
So the questions that we got are, there are 3 questions, and they're all cousins. They're all related. But number 1, would those who protect abusers put their own children or grandchildren in the unsupervised care of the abuser? And again, this answer is a resounding yes, not because I'm guessing or taking an educated guess, but because people have told me this. I call into question people's policies when they have these dangerous policies, and I've asked this question. Would you allow your own kids to be with this person? And I think the first time I heard the answer, I was a little bit surprised, because what I expected them to say was, well, no. To which I was going to come back and say, well, then why would you allow this person to be around other people's kids?
Right.
But instead, the answer I got back was, well, yeah, I would. Because and when I asked why, well, because I believe that they're repentant. They seemed sincere. Listen for that word. Yeah. Listen to the language. They seemed sincere whenever they had confessed their sins or something to that effect. They seemed sincere. Not that they are sincere, not that they proved that they're sincere, but they seemed that they're sincere. If you're going on what's seemingly sincere, you really, really, really need to call those leaders into account and be like, wait, well, no, back up. This person seems to be trustworthy, or they've proven to be trustworthy. Because there's a radical difference between seeming to be trustworthy and actually being trustworthy. And by the way, anybody who's ever raped a child is not trustworthy. Ever.
Never. And I think that is something that within the church is still, and probably will be for time evermore, difficult for some people to grasp. Because we think of God, we think of Jesus as being all forgiving, just compassionate.
Even though he wasn't, I'm just going to throw that in there. He was not all forgiving.
No, but
forgiveness was conditioned.
The picture that we are given, the pictures that are painted actually of Jesus, are always with outstretched arms, welcoming people. We don't see his anger. We don't see his wrath. We're not reminded of his words, to get far from me, stay away from me or depart from him, that type of thing. But we think of Jesus as welcoming all.
Yeah, and all the warnings that he gave for people to stay away from deceptive people. to watch out. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says, ravenous wolves, beware of ravenous wolves. They come in to destroy. And then he says, they bear bad fruit. You will recognize them by their fruit that they produce. He talks about being cut down and thrown into the fire. The same thing, he echoes what John the Baptist said when John the Baptist introduced Jesus in Matthew 3. John the Baptist, he said, his winnowing fork is in his hand. He's ready to separate the wheat from the chaff and throw the chaff into the unquenchable fire.
We kind of don't, not kind of, we don't want to hear those things, because they're hard. Mm-hmm. They're hard.
I like when people say, that doesn't sound like Jesus. Yeah, but have you not read your Bible?
It is.
I mean,
it is Jesus,
he was vicious towards people. Think about the millstone.
Yeah.
I mean, ironically, the millstone passage is embedded in Matthew chapter 18, which is the go-to passage that these people use to say, he who is without sin, be the one to cast the first stone. Let's talk about stones. Jesus talked about stones. He talked about a millstone in Matthew 18.
He sure does.
Matthew 18 is the passage where people weasel their way out of reporting abusers because they say, well, you're supposed to first go to your brother who sins against you. And, just you and him, show him his fault. And then, if he doesn't see the error of his ways, bring 2 or 3 other witnesses with you. And if he still doesn't listen to you, bring him before the church. And then if he still doesn't listen, treat him as you would a tax collector or a sinner. Okay, so that's Matthew 18. But Matthew 18 starts with Jesus saying, anyone who causes any of these little ones of mine to stumble, it would be better for him to have a large millstone, literally in the Koine Greek language, the original language that Jesus probably spoke that in, certainly that it was written in. The word that's used for large millstone is literally 2 words butted up together, donkey millstone. Donkey millstone.
Okay.
It's because it was a millstone that was too large to be moved by humans. You couldn't push. You literally could not push this millstone. Mm-hmm. This was like a commercial grade millstone meant for pressing tons of grain or whatever it was that you were going to press with it. A donkey millstone. The image that Jesus put in people's mind when he said that. Mm-hmm. It was gruesome.
It is. And I get this picture, of this person with this big boulder. Massive
millstone.
Yes.
And he said it would that would be better for that to happen to you.
Right. And
and to be drowned in the depth of the sea. Not the sea, the depth of the sea, the deepest of the deep sea. Mm-hmm. And it's this double death because your neck is snapped before you ever get dropped off the side of the boat. Jesus is painting a very gruesome picture to say, in your mind, this gruesome bloodbath scene that you see, that would be better for the person than if they had never harmed one of my little ones. So, they forget about that passage.
Right. Well,
and then they jump right into...
It's a hard passage. It's
the second part of Matthew 18.
We don't want to hear, And I think that's where people fall back on the nice things. Well, we need to forgive. When for the person being abused, if you don't forgive your abuser, you'll never have peace, that type of thing. But as far as with the children, protecting the abuser, I think it's out of naive misrepresentation, really, of the scriptures.
Yeah, I don't think it's with malice. No, I really don't.
No.
But in the end, whether the intention is malice or whether it's naivety, either way, the end result is the same. Children get hurt because of poor theology, because people don't think these things through, and because they're willing to risk their own children and grandchildren to put them in the care of these people to prove that they're repentant.
Right. Too many times, Jimmy, just in the short term of this podcast, you have mentioned churches that have protected abusers, and they've gone on and abused multiple people within the churches.
Yeah.
And, Were they preachers' children? Were they elders' children? We don't, I don't know. Certainly you wouldn't know all, but I'm sure those people, felt their children were safe with this person because he seemed repentant. He seemed honest and sincere. I keep thinking of your dad. He was probably one of the most sincere-looking people that, very soft-spoken.
And sounding, and his actions were sincere.
Soft-spoken, very kind actions, very reverent to elderly people, very funny and kind to children. He was someone that people welcomed into his home with their children.
Yeah.
And even if he were to get out of prison today, I am certain there would be people welcoming him with their children.
What a great man. What a wonderful man. He did his time. He's so remorseful. He's so sorry for what he's done.
But
we don't want to place any additional burden on top of him.
Right.
Well, I mean, he's told me repeatedly that he would exploit those people in a heartbeat. He would find them in a heartbeat, and he would exploit them in a heartbeat. Exactly. He's told me this, and it's common knowledge. Pedophiles in prison, they all have a saying. It's an incredibly common saying. If you don't have religion, get religion. And what they mean by that is you befriend church people because they're so naive. You'll have easy access to any victim that you want with the full support and backing of the leaders.
That's so sad. It is. Sad but true.
Yeah. So the next question, even after knowing that this person is a perpetrator, would they put their own kids or grandkids with the abuser once or multiple times over a long period of time? So basically the same question as the first one. The first one was unsupervised care. The answer is yes. But what about a long period of time? Would after a while they start saying, something's not right? The answer to that is no. And the answer to the question, would they put them in the care of a known abuser for a long period of time? The answer is a resounding yes. And again, this is not hypothetical. This is not guesswork. I've been told this repeatedly from church leader after church leader after church leader. And I say church leader because most of the training that I do is with churches. But I think there are certainly people outside of the church. There are people who probably don't even believe in God who would take the same stance. Human nature tells us to look at the person who's in front of us, read the body language, and then you'll be able to tell whether they're sincere or not. And then we come up with things like, well, they seemed sincere.
Right.
A proper question, maybe I should save that for the end. What questions should we ask these people to find out if they are sincere or not?
Or is there a way of knowing if a person truly is sincere?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think there is. I think there's a pretty fail-safe method for that.
My mind was drifting off because I was thinking of a member of the church. This is before you were even born or when you were very small, Jimmy. But he shared with us the fact that he was abused as a child by a preacher who traveled around. Mm-hmm. His family welcomed this preacher into their home time and time again. He told his father what was being done, and his father refused to believe him.
Because he was such a nice man.
Yes, he was such a nice man, and he acted so wonderful. He enjoyed the children, he enjoyed their family. Sadly, this man shared the bed with this child, and that's in the day when it was not uncommon for adults to share a bed. You didn't have guest rooms and all that. And this man said he cringed every time this happened because he knew what was going to happen to him. But to his father, who was, very big in the church, very well-known, very respected, refused to believe it because there was
because
this
the guy
look.
Seemed like a nice guy.
He seemed nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that really blinds people, and abusers know it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, my dad has written volumes of letters about, how he preys on the naivety of people, and how he intentionally says things and tests people to find out just how naive they are, and will blatantly do things in front of people, trying to gain their trust or increase their trust that they have in him. And he said it's super easy to do. It's not like, he also rejects this term grooming. He agrees with me that testing is a much better term, because he said I would constantly test people, and I would find out, like, how far would these people go? Would they let me babysit their own kids? And he told me a story once. I may have mentioned this on a previous podcast. I mean, we're up over 150 now.
Yeah, it's
right?
hard to
it's hard to
remember. Yes, exactly,
so it's hard to remember what we said and what we haven't.
Right.
But he told me a story about one of his victims, who he did not confess to. This was not a confessed victim. This was a recent victim up to the time of his arrest. And he told me that he got a letter. Apparently, he had been writing letters to the parents of this kid that he abused from prison, and God knows what he said to them. I have some ideas, and I'd probably be pretty close. I'd be pretty accurate. But he said the mother of this victim wrote him while he was in prison, and was just gushing over my dad. She was gushing over him, saying, it's a shame that you were falsely accused. If you were to get out of prison, if you appealed and you were to get out of prison, I would invite you in tomorrow to babysit my kid again. And he's laughing about this as he's telling me the story.
Right.
He's like, in his words, he said, this lady is so stupid. Which is also the word that he uses for church volunteers, people who come in from the church and volunteer their time in prison. That's how abusers think of people like this. It's not that the abuser thinks that they're really repentant and that they can refrain from abusing a kid. That's not what the abuser's thinking. The abuser's thinking, my goodness, are these people that gullible? And I know this because not only my dad, but other abusers have told me this. They think it's hilarious.
This angers me so much. It truly does.
It should anger us.
It does. It angers me so much because we feel guilty for not extending open arms to everyone, to all, as you said.
And we shouldn't.
But we do. And I've been guilty of doing that. I'm not anymore. Of course, I thank God I've been enlightened and educated. But there's this feeling of guilt, how horrible we are to judge another person, to judge their sincerity, to judge their actions that they've repented of and all that. And there's a time and a place where we need to remember what Jesus said.
Yeah.
I think the millstone, that vision needs to be before us when we're talking about abusers.
Yeah.
I truly do.
And that's for a reason. It's not that Jesus doesn't believe in second chances.
No.
It's that this is who these people are. I mean, they don't stop. They think it's funny. I mean, imagine that. If you did something to critically injure somebody else, wouldn't you either, one, confess or write an apology, or at least at a very bare minimum want to crawl into a cave and never come out and face that person again?
Yes.
Instead, he's writing letters from prison to a victim who he didn't confess to. That wasn't one of his 23 victims that he confessed to. He's writing the parents of a victim, taunting them, saying that he's falsely accused and, my goodness, I can't believe that I'm spending time in prison, toying with the parents to see what response he'll get back. He gets this letter back, this gushing letter from this poor woman who's totally gullible, totally naive, has no idea that he abused their little child. And she's writing saying, if you got out of prison, tomorrow I would hire you. I would give you work. And I don't think she's stupid. I don't think she's dumb. I don't think she's uneducated. I don't think she's a bad person. I don't know who she is. But I have to guess she's a completely normal person who believes in the sincerity of other people. And my father took advantage of that.
Right.
For no other reason. He had no reason to write this woman from prison except to screw with her. Because he thought it was funny. There was no other reason to do it.
It's a thrill.
He certainly wasn't writing to apologize or to confess that he abused her child. He was writing to mess with her head, and he thought it was hilarious. He told me about it. He thought it was so funny that she was so naive that she would hire him. And it's a badge of honor for the abuser.
I just wish that people could understand how deeply, what's the word, evil. I'll just say evil abusers are. That's the only word I can think to explain it.
Yeah,
just
it
plain
is.
Evil.
It's twisted, it's demented, it's deceptive, it's wrong, it's sinful, it's a crime.
We get angry. We rear up with anger when we hear of a person mistreating a dog. Mm-hmm. That is a big thing right now, and I do too. I can't stand mistreatment of animals in any way. God forbid that I think a child is being mistreated.
Well, it's interesting you say that because there's a story in the news today. It's a viral video. Somebody captured a police officer take his canine dog, and he got mad at the dog for whatever reason, and he picked the dog up. The leash was around its neck. He picked the dog up, spun it around him, and slammed the dog up against his police cruiser. The guy just resigned, I think this morning or yesterday he resigned. This is national news right now. National news. For a dog. Not that it's not wrong. I mean, it's horrific. I'm not going to watch the video because I can't do it.
I
can't
be
watch
able to see
animal
that.
cruelty any more than I can watch with humans. But it's a great point. This is a national story because one police officer's dog got abused by the police officer.
And he is being forced to resign.
And he's being forced to resign.
Yes.
Churches do the polar opposite. They welcome them in and say, my goodness, why don't you babysit my kids? Okay, the last question here. Yeah. Would a protector of an abuser be willing to, quote unquote, prove their trust of the abuser by putting their kids or grandkids unsupervised with the perp? Absolutely, yeah. I think that's the whole purpose, is they want to prove that this person who seems to be nice, again, who seems to be sincere, who seems to be repentant, I'm willing to go the extra mile to prove that my policy to have somebody keep an eye on them, which is the irony on it, they develop these covenant agreements to have the babysitters and keep an eye on them, but they would allow their own kids to be unsupervised without any supervision, without an accountability partner or a babysitter. They would absolutely wholeheartedly be willing to put their own kids or grandkids in what I would call imminent danger to prove that their theology is right. Absolutely they would. So what do we do about it? How do we actually prove whether somebody is repentant or not? Well, I mean, this is a very short, very simple answer. Very, very plain. This person would never be caught dead around another child ever again. Right. And that's not just physically. That also includes online. Right. That means they would relinquish their internet. They would relinquish any smartphone or any phone that had any semblance of being a smartphone, any phone that had a camera. If it's a flip phone that has a camera on it, they would relinquish it. They would have nothing but a good old-fashioned dial-up landline phone hanging on the wall. They would have no internet in their home. They would have no access whatsoever to minor children again. So that's how you prove whether somebody's repentant or not.
On a kind of a similar way, but not to that degree, would be the alcoholic that says, I don't drink anymore. I'm dry. I've been dry. That alcoholic, even though we can't compare alcohol addiction to sex abuse, and I'm not trying to at all, not at all, but that alcoholic will not go get a job in a bar, apply for a job in a bar
to prove that they're that they can refrain
that they're
from
clean. That alcoholic would not get a job as a driver, as a beer distributor, or as, they're not going to do that because they're going to stay as far away from what destroyed them and their family, because alcoholism destroys families, not just the person. They will stay away from that, and that's how you know that that person is sincere. And I love what you've said about the abuser would just do everything in their power to stay away from children.
They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't fathom it. They wouldn't suggest it. They wouldn't. And if somebody else suggested it for them, they'd be repulsed at the idea. They would say, my goodness, you mean, wait a second, let me back up a little bit. Okay, here's what a repentant abuser would say. You mean you want me to sign this covenant agreement that keeps my sex offender status? I'm on the sex offender registry. You want me to keep this a secret from the congregation? And you want to assign accountability people to walk with me wherever I go throughout the church building? And
so
I
that
still
we can keep this a secret.
But I still get to be, you're telling me I still get to be around kids. I still get to watch them, observe them, watch them play, watch little girls in their dresses do somersaults, and I get to look at their underwear, and, I get to have free reign in the church building. The only caveat is that you're going to assign somebody who sits beside me?
It makes no sense. Yeah, exactly.
You people are nuts. Yeah. That's what a repentant person would say. You people are nuts.
Yes.
If you think that's a good idea.
Amen, that times 1,000.
That's what a repentant abuser would say.
Exactly.
They would say, I want nothing to do with this church. I don't want to be around children. I don't need to be around children. I can't be around children. You people are insane.
Right.
If you think accountability means keeping my status secretive from parents of children while giving me access to be around children, you people are nuts. That's what a repentant abuser would say. I wish people could understand
this. I really do. I wish, Jimmy. I wish. That's my prayer for this podcast. It really is.
Yeah.
That people will grasp the severity of this.
Yeah. And some will. Not everybody has dangerous policies.
That is my prayer. Yes.
Well, you want to leave us with a truth bomb for the day?
Okay. The truth bomb for today is plain and simple. Once an abuser, always an abuser. A wolf will never change into a lamb.
I'll amen that. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to this episode, and we will catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron. And check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.